Today, we will discuss on the hierarchy of Norwegian Superior Court and the doctrine of stare decisis. First, the doctrine of stare decisis, or the rule of judicial precedence, is a legal term which derived from a Latin phrase that means to stand by things which have been previously decided or let the decision stand. This doctrine has been accepted by the Malaysian courts as part of the common law applicable by virtue of Section 3 of the Civil Law Act 1956. It shall apply whenever the relevant facts of an earlier case is similar to the facts of a subsequent case. That is, the relevant facts of the two cases are similar. Simply put, ratio decidendi with similar facts binding future court, not the decision. Now take a look in this diagram. We are going to explain all three eras of the hierarchy of court vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. First, vertical operation is where a court is bound by the previous decision of all courts higher than itself in the same hierarchy. In the first era, the decision of a high court was bound by the decision of Privy Council and Federal Court. The decision of Federal Court regarding civil and criminal matters bound by the decision of the Privy Council. Furthermore, the Federal Court, bound by its own previous civil decision, can be clearly seen in the case of Central Securities Holding Berhad, reported in 1980. However, the Federal Court, not bound by its own previous criminal decision, referred to the case of Oi Hee Koi, the decision of the Privy Council binding the Federal Court and High Court. In the case of Director General of Inland Revenue, stated that the Privy Council was not bound by its own previous decision. In the second era, the High Court bound to follow previous decision of Privy Council unless the decision is inconsistent with a decision of the Supreme Court or has been modified by the legislation, the Supreme Court binding the High Court. In the third era, the High Court was bound by the decision of the Federal Court and Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal bound by the decision of the Federal Court and the decision of Court of Appeal binding the High Court. Moreover, it is bound to its own precedents, the Federal Court binding the Court of Appeal and High Court. And also, it can depart from its own precedent.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Now I will explain the horizontal operation. In the first era, the horizontal parts can be seen from the Federal Court and High Court Malaya and Borneo. In the second era, the High Court remained the same as before, whilst the Federal Court transformed into the Supreme Court. Based on the case of Lee Thaisang, the Supreme Court was bound by its former ruling made when exercising its appellate jurisdiction. When exercising its original jurisdiction under the Federal Court, under the Federal Constitution. Moreover, in the third era, the Supreme Court changed into the Federal Court, with also sending the criminal and civil matters. In the recent case of Asia Pacific Higher Learning Sendirian Berhad, Azhar Muhammad said that Federal Court is bound by its own previous decisions, but there are exceptional circumstances that allow it to depart from the previous decisions. At the same time, in the third era, the High Court Malaya and Borneo changed into High Court of Malaya, Sabah, and Sarawak. The High Court is not bound by its own decision. This can be seen in the case of Sundralingam, where it was held by the Federal Court that one High Court judge doesn't bind another High Court judge. Furthermore, the High Court in the case of Joginder Singh asserted that it was not bound to follow a decision of High Court in appeal presided over by 3 judges in the case of Hassan bin Ishaq. Next, I will explain about the diagonal operation. Okay, in the first era, diagonal arrow can be seen from the Privy Council. The Privy Council transformed into the Supreme Court in the second era, and based on Jurnal Undang-Undang dan Masyarakat 2004, with the abolishment of the former Federal Court and the founding of the former Supreme Court, Federal Court's jurisdictions and powers and its decisions were binding and on all subordinate courts. The Privy Council's earlier decision would bind a subsequent case, and the Supreme Court was not bound by the Privy Councils. Furthermore, the Supreme Court in the second era diagonally changed into the Court of Appeal. In the third era, the Court of Appeal stands on equal footing with the former, which grants it the authority to overrule its decisions, as can notably be seen in the case of Nuraini binti Umar and another. The Privy Council in the first era also diagonally leads to the Federal Court in the third era. However, the Federal Court is not bound to the Privy Council based on the case of Dali Bhagwan Singh, P. Swee Chin delivered an assertion. Federal Court and its forerunner, i.e. the Supreme Court, after all appeals to the Privy Council were abolished, has never refused to depart from its own